My name is Grace Anderson, and at 31 I was working 3 jobs and still rationing gas money the week I found out my grandfather had been sending me money every month for almost 4 years. $7,000 a month by the end. I never saw a dollar of it. I was an ER nurse pulling night shifts, picking up weekend agency work, and teaching a CNA class on the side, and I still counted quarters before payday. I'd been drowning so quietly for so long that nobody at that table thought I'd ever look up. So when my grandfather smiled at his own birthday dinner and asked how my check was treating me, I almost choked on the answer. What my mother did with that money was bad. What she signed to keep it coming was a crime. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we tell quiet stories about ordinary women who stop apologizing and start setting the record straight, one document at a time. No shouting, no fireworks, just the slow, satisfying click of the truth locking into place. If a calm voice and an earned reckoning are your thing, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The night this story really starts, I clocked out of the emergency room at 3 a.m. and sat in my car doing math. Not patient math. Gas math. I had a quarter tank and a CNA class to teach across town at 8, and I was trying to decide if I could make both on what was left. I ate cold noodles out of the container on my dashboard and didn't feel sorry for myself, because feeling sorry for yourself burns calories you can't spare. 2 hours earlier, I'd run a code on a 60-year-old man whose heart had quit in aisle 6 of a grocery store. My hands were steady the whole time. That's the thing people never understood about me. I was good at my job. I was good at staying calm when the monitor screamed. I just couldn't make the numbers in my own life add up, no matter how many shifts I stacked. I'd taken out the student loans myself, paid them myself, never asked a soul for help. Somewhere along the way, I'd built a wall around the word help, brick by brick, until I couldn't have asked if I'd wanted to. My phone buzzed against the cup holder. A text from my mother. "Sunday dinner," it said. "Grandpa's coming." I read it twice and felt my stomach tighten like a fist, and I couldn't have told you why. He was the gentlest man I knew. Seeing him should have been the best part of my month. Instead, something low and cold turned over in me, the way it does when a patient's numbers look fine but your gut says they're not. I started the car. I told myself it was the gas gauge. It wasn't. Sunday dinner was at my mother's house, the one my father built before he died. The one she was fighting to keep, though I didn't know that yet. I came straight from a shift, still in scrubs, smelling like hand sanitizer. My sister Sloane came in glowing from Cabo, a new bag on her shoulder that cost more than my car payment. Her husband Trent talked about his investments like a man who'd never lost a dime, though I'd later learn the only thing he was good at investing was other people's money. My mother looked me up and down and sighed. "You always have to make yourself look so hard done by," she said, smoothing a napkin. I let it go. Letting it go was a muscle I'd overdeveloped. Then the front door opened and my grandfather walked in, 80 years old and still standing like a man who'd poured concrete for a living, which he had, before he built a company out of it. He crossed the room straight to me and hugged me so tight my spine cracked, and when he pulled back his eyes were shining with some private, satisfied pride I couldn't place. "You're taking such good care of yourself," he said quietly, just to me. "It puts my mind at ease." I laughed, confused. I was a woman who reheated gas station coffee to save $4. Whatever was easing his mind, it wasn't my life. I almost asked what he meant. Sloane called everyone to the table before I could, and my mother's hand landed on his arm, steering him away, a little too quick. I filed it under nothing. I was wrong to file it under nothing. We were halfway through the roast when my grandfather set down his fork, looked at me with that same warm light, and asked the question that would eventually crack everything open. "How's that check treating you, sweetheart?" I thought he meant my paycheck. I thought he was making small talk about nursing wages, the way older relatives do. "I'm getting by," I said. "Hospital pays what it pays." Across the table, my mother set her water glass down a beat too hard and pivoted the conversation toward Sloane's latest wedding client. Fast, the way you'd grab a dropped scalpel. I noticed it the way you notice a rhythm change on a monitor, a flicker you can't unsee. My grandfather wasn't done. I kept the card you sent me last month, he said, smiling. Stuck it right on the fridge. Best handwriting in the family. I sat very still. I had not sent him a card. Not last month, not last year. I opened my mouth to say so, and my mother stood up and pulled him toward the den to show him new photos of Sloane's dog, her hand firm on his elbow, her voice bright and loud. The moment closed like a door. I sat there with a fork in my hand and a question I couldn't ask without sounding like I was accusing someone of something at a Sunday dinner. So I drove home with the radio off, and that one sentence looping in my head like a pulse I couldn't slow down. How's that check treating you? Which check? I told myself I was tired. I'd been telling myself I was tired for about 4 years. The next morning, the mail told me I wasn't tired. I was robbed. The envelope was thick and official and addressed to me at my own apartment, which was strange because nobody official ever wanted me badly enough to find me. It was from an accounting firm I'd never heard of, and it referenced, in dry tax language, the annual gifts to Grace Anderson made on behalf of Mr. Walter Hale. Gifts. To me. There was a number in there that made me sit down on my own kitchen floor. $84,000. In the last year alone. I read it 4 times. I'm a nurse. I read charts for a living. The letter was not ambiguous. Somebody had been gifting me, on paper, more than 3 times what I earned breaking my body in an emergency room, and I had never seen a cent of it. My first instinct wasn't to cry. It was to verify. I pulled up 4 years of my own bank statements on my phone, scrolled all the way back, line by line, the way I'd scan a med list for an interaction. Nothing. No deposits like that. Ever. Not once. Not partial. Whatever my grandfather thought he was sending me had landed somewhere that wasn't my account. I called my mother that night and kept my voice easy. Hey, Mom. Random question. Has Grandpa ever sent anything to me through you? There was a pause on the line, just a half second too long. What on earth are you talking about? She said, and then, softer, the way you'd talk down someone confused. Honey, you're working yourself stupid. Go to bed. I hung up and stared at the letter on my floor. I'd just been gaslit by the woman who raised me, gently, expertly, in under a minute. So I started keeping the envelopes. The next evening, I stood in front of 12 CNA students teaching them to take a manual blood pressure, and my hands did the demonstration while my mind chewed on the number. Count before you react, I told them, pressing the bell of the stethoscope to a student's arm. It was the first thing my father ever taught me, back when he was alive and I was a kid, trailing him around his job sites. Count before you react. He died when I was 24, and after the funeral my mother handled everything, the paperwork, the accounts, the survivor forms, all of it. I was wrecked and grateful, and I signed whatever she put in front of me. I never read a single page. I trusted the strongest grief in the room to be the most honest one. If you've ever been the one who handles it, the strong one, the person nobody worries about, you already know how invisible it makes you. I handled everything in my life, except the one question I should have asked years ago, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how I finally asked it, because I think some of you need to ask it too. If this is hitting somewhere tender, hit subscribe and stay with me. It gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets a lot better. I dismissed the class, sat in the empty room, and let myself think the thought I'd been outrunning. My mother handled the paperwork after Dad died. My mother handled Grandpa's gifts. My mother handled everything, and I had never once checked her work. A week later, my mother asked me to come help her clear out the spare room, and I said yes, because saying yes was another muscle I'd overdeveloped, but also because I wanted inside that house. While she made coffee in the kitchen, I sat at her desk where her laptop was open to her checking account, and I did something I'm not proud of and would do again. I scrolled. There they were, $7,000, deposited the first of every month, regular as a heartbeat, smaller in the older months, $5,000, then climbing. And right beneath each deposit, within a day, an outgoing transfer of the same amount to an account ending in the same 4 digits. Over and over, 4 years deep. I photographed the screen with my phone, my pulse loud in my ears, steady hands again, the gift of the job. Those last 4 digits snagged on something in my memory. Months back, splitting the cost of Grandpa's Christmas gift, Sloane had handed me a check off her own account, and I'd glanced at the number out of habit. Same 4 digits. The money came in to my mother and went straight out to my sister. I felt the floor of the thing drop open. But I also already knew, sitting there, that a photo of my mother's screen proved almost nothing. It wasn't my account. I had no right to demand a single record from a bank that didn't know my name. Suspicion isn't proof. A nurse can be certain a patient's septic and still need the labs before anyone will move. I closed the laptop just as my sister's voice cut across the room. "What exactly are you doing on Mom's computer, Grace?" Her tone was ice. I smiled and said I was helping. I'd learned my calm from monitors that scream. I didn't yell. That's worth saying twice, because everything that came after depended on it. I didn't yell at Sloane in our mother's spare room. I closed the laptop, said I was helping, and went back to folding old curtains while my heart did something complicated. Yelling felt good for about 4 seconds and lost you the war. I'd watched families do it in the ER for years, scream at the one person holding the answers, and then wonder why no one would help them. So I drove home and I built a file. Dates, amounts, the photo of the IRS letter, the photo of my mother's statement. I laid it out the way I'd chart a patient I suspected someone had been quietly mismanaging for years, which, it turned out, was exactly what I was. And looking at it, cold and clean on my kitchen table, I understood the wall I was up against. I could see the crime. I couldn't touch the proof. The money flowed from Grandpa to Mom to Sloane, and every link in that chain belonged to someone else's bank, someone else's account, someone else's signature. I needed someone who knew how the law actually moved money, because I clearly didn't. I'd spent 7 years refusing to ask anyone for help with anything. Now I was going to ask a complete stranger for it, a free legal aid clinic with a 6-week wait, before I'd ask my own mother for the truth one more time. That tells you everything about how far gone the trust already was. I made the appointment that night. Then I went and worked a 12-hour shift, because the rent was still due, and robbed women still have to show up to work. Dana Whitfield had a cramped office, a wall of binders, and the unhurried patience of someone who'd watched a lot of families eat each other. She listened to my whole story without once telling me I was overreacting, which alone almost made me cry. Then she explained the machinery I'd been blind to. "Your grandfather wrote the checks," she said. "If somebody signed your name on the back and deposited them into an account that wasn't yours, that's a forged endorsement. The front of the check looks perfectly legal, so the bank never blinks. The fraud lives on the back." I leaned forward. "So I pull the backs, and I've got them." Dana shook her head slowly, and that's where my stomach sank. "You can't. You're not the account holder, and you're not the payer. Only the person who wrote the checks, your grandfather or law enforcement, can make that bank produce the endorsement images." I sat with that. "So, I need him to believe me," I said, "before I have the proof that would make him believe me." Dana nodded. "That's the trap they built, whether they meant to or not. His trust in your mother is the lock." She let it sit, then added the part that changed the temperature of the whole room. "But understand what you might be looking at. If your name was signed by someone else's hand to take your money, that's not a family disagreement, Grace. In Ohio, that can rise to forgery. That's criminal." I drove home doing the new math. To get the truth, I needed my grandfather. To get my grandfather, I had to get past my mother, and she had spent 4 years standing exactly between us, holding his arm, steering him gently away from me at every single table. 2 days later, my mother called, sweet as pie, with an assignment. "Grandpa's turning 80 next month," she said. "We're throwing him a big dinner at his house, the whole family, his old friends. You'll handle the flowers, won't you? You're good at the small things. The small things. I held the phone and looked at my file on the table and understood, with a clarity that almost felt like calm, exactly what I'd been handed. Every person who mattered would be in one room. My grandfather, my mother, Sloane, Trent, aunts, cousins, his oldest friends, witnesses. You cannot rewrite a story that 30 people watched happen. Of course, I said. I'd love to do the flowers. In the family group chat, Sloane was already posting photos of the venue she was arranging, the linens, the catering, the string quartet, planning a beautiful evening with money that had come out of my grandfather's account meant for me. I looked at those photos for a long time. I could have screamed in that chat. I could have typed out the whole accusation and blown it up that afternoon. Instead, I sent a thumbs up and a flower emoji, and I started planning, because rage is loud and useless and a deadline is quiet and patient. They were building me the perfect stage with my own stolen money. The least I could do was show up on time. I let them plan it, is a sentence I'd repeat to myself for weeks, because I needed the audience. There was just one problem standing between me and that room. I still couldn't prove a thing without my grandfather. And my mother answered his phone now. Before I went around my mother, I gave her one chance. I tell you that not to make myself a saint, but because it mattered to me, later, that I'd offered her the door first. I stopped by alone, on a weeknight, and found her at the kitchen table. "Mom," I said gently, "is there anything you want to tell me about Grandpa's money?" I watched her face do the math I'd done a dozen times now, watched her decide. She set down her tea. "You don't steal from family, Grace," she said, with the flat certainty of someone who'd practiced the line in her head. "You borrow." And there it was, the whole architecture of it, confessed and defended in the same breath. Not a denial, a justification. She knew exactly what she'd taken, and she'd already decided it wasn't taking. I kept my voice level. "And when do you pay borrowed money back?" She looked at me like I was being deliberately cruel. "When I can. Your grandfather has more than he'll ever spend, and you've always been the strong one. Sloane needed it. The house needed it." There was a flicker then, something tired and frightened under the entitlement, gone before I could name it. Then she added, almost to herself, "He always did love a nice thank you note." My whole body went still. The card on his fridge, the best handwriting in the family. I didn't react. I said I had an early shift and I left. But I sat in my car in her driveway and typed a note to myself so I wouldn't forget the shape of it. Letters. She hadn't just taken the money. She'd written to him as me, year after year, in my name, to keep him grateful and quiet. That was a different kind of crime, and I was starting to understand I'd only seen the top of it. Dana connected me with a forensic accountant named Russ, who agreed to start on a payment plan I'd be paying off well into the next decade, and who talked about money the way I talked about bodies, like a system that can't lie if you read it right. "People lie," Russ told me on our first call. "Cash flow doesn't." He ran what he called a lifestyle analysis off public records and the pieces I'd photographed. Sloane's wedding planning business had been bleeding money for 3 years, vendors unpaid, a tax lien filed and then mysteriously satisfied. My mother's house had been one missed payment from foreclosure, and then, somehow, wasn't. Both holes, Russ said, lined up almost perfectly with thousands of dollars a month, climbing to 7, flowing in from somewhere off the books. "I can show the money landed in their lives," he said. "I can show the size and the timing. What I can't do from out here is put a name on the hand that signed the back of those checks. For that, you need the endorsement images, and for those, you need the man who wrote them." Always the same wall. Always my grandfather, standing on the far side of my mother. I thanked Russ, and hung up, and sat with the shape of the problem. I had the why, and the where, and the how much. I had a tired, frightened woman who'd as good as confessed across her own kitchen table. What I didn't have was the one thing a room full of witnesses would actually believe, the back of a single check. My own name forged in someone else's hand. Numbers are bad liars, Russ had said before he hung up. But I need the back of the check to name the thief. I had 4 weeks until the party. I needed my grandfather alone before then. Getting to my grandfather turned out to be its own small war. I called his house 3 times that week. Every time, my mother answered, "He's resting, honey. He's out with his friends. I'll have him call you back." He never called back, and I understood she was the one deciding that. She'd made herself the switchboard of his whole life, kindly, helpfully, the way she made herself the switchboard of everything, and most of the family thanked her for it. So I did the thing she wouldn't expect. I wrote him a card, an actual card in my own real handwriting, and I drove it to his house myself and put it in his mailbox while her car wasn't in the drive. "Coffee," I wrote. "Just you and me, no one else. There's something I need to ask you in person, and I need you to hear it from me." Then I waited, and waiting nearly killed me, because for all I knew she checked his mail too, and the card was already shredded. 3 days of silence. I worked my shifts and taught my class and jumped every time my phone lit up. On the 3rd night, an unknown number called. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. "Gracie." My grandfather's voice, low, careful, calling from a number I didn't know. "I'm at my friend Earl's house. I got your card." A pause, and when he spoke again, there was something in it I'd never heard from him. An old man's hurt trying to stay steady. "You want to see me without your mother there. I need you to tell me why, sweetheart. Because lately I've been getting the feeling something in this family isn't right, and nobody will look me in the eye and say it." We met at a diner Earl owned, in a back booth. Just the 2 of us, and I did the hardest thing I'd done since my father's funeral. I told him the truth slowly, and then I laid one piece of paper on the table between the coffee cups. It was a copy of a single canceled check, one he'd written himself, one I'd been able to get a copy of through his own bank with nothing more than his name on it, because it was his check, and I'd asked the right way. The front read, in his own steady hand, "Pay to the order of Grace Anderson, $7,000. I watched him recognize his own writing and smile, just for a second, the way you'd smile at a photo of someone you love. Then I said, "Turn it over, Grandpa." He turned it over. On the back was my name, Grace Anderson, signed in a looping, confident hand that was not mine and never had been, deposited into an account I'd never owned. He stared at it for a long time. His thumb moved over the forged signature like he could feel that it was wrong. "That's not your writing," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I've never seen $1 of this money. Any of it. 4 years. His hand was shaking now, but his eyes were dry and getting harder by the second. He reached into his wallet, slow, and pulled out a small worn card, the kind you'd keep because it meant something. He set it next to the check. The handwriting on the card matched the back of the check exactly, loop for loop. "You sent me this," he said quietly. "For my last birthday. I carry it everywhere." I looked at a thank you note I had never written, in my name, in the same forging hand. "I didn't, Grandpa," I said. "I didn't even know you were giving me anything to thank you for." And I watched 4 years of a lie he'd been living rearrange itself behind his eyes. My grandfather wanted to drive to my mother's house that night and have it out. His hands were flat on the diner table and his jaw was set, and for a moment I saw the man who'd built a company by refusing to back down from anybody. I put my hand over his. "No," I said. "Not like that. If you confront her tonight, alone, in her kitchen, you know what happens. She cries. She explains. You're an old man who loves his daughter, and by morning she's halfway talked you back out of believing your own eyes." He didn't argue, because he knew it was true. So I gave him a plan instead of a tantrum, and I want to be clear about this part, because it matters. I didn't ask him to rescue me. I asked him to hand me one tool only he could reach. "You wrote the checks," I said. "That means you, and only you, can authorize the bank to release the endorsement images for every payment all 4 years. Dana will send the request the right way, on paper, so nobody can wave it off. He nodded slowly, following. And then? And then we do it once, I said. In front of everyone. At your party. Where she can't pull you into the den and rewrite it. Where 30 people see the back of the check at the same time. He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather made everything he has by never once being afraid of the truth, even when it cost him." His voice caught. "Don't let me be afraid of it now, even if it's my own daughter." We shook on it like a business deal, an 80-year-old man and his granddaughter in a diner booth, and for the first time in 4 years I didn't feel like I was drowning alone. The request went out on Dana's letterhead, signed by my grandfather, and then came the part nobody tells you about, the waiting. Banks don't produce 4 years of records overnight, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went back to work and acted exactly normal, because the worst thing I could do now was let anyone see the storm coming. Sloan texted me about the flowers, what colors, what budget, and I texted back like a sister who suspected nothing. My mother called to remind me to dress nicely for once. I said I would. There's a moment in nursing where you stop reacting and start documenting, because the chart is the thing that protects the patient when the shouting starts and memories get convenient. That's exactly where I was. Calm on the outside, building a record that no amount of crying could argue with, one careful page at a time. If you've ever had to be the steady one while everyone around you rewrote what really happened, you already understand the kind of patience this took. It is the loneliest patience there is. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because the night this all came out, the quiet ones in the audience are the ones who messaged me after and said, "That was me," I finally asked. 10 days before the party, my phone rang during a break. It was Dana, and her voice had changed. "The images came back, Grace," she said. "All 4 years of them." A pause. "You should sit down before I send these over. It's worse than the money." I sat in a supply closet under fluorescent light and opened the file Dana sent, and there it all was, 4 years of theft laid flat. Check after check, the front in my grandfather's hand, the back signed Grace Anderson in a looping forgery that matched the thank you note in his wallet. Every single one deposited by mobile capture into the joint account my sister held with her husband. Trent had set up the deposits. Sloan had signed my name. It was clean and complete and damning, and it would have been enough. But Dana had warned me there was more, and the more is what turned my stomach. The endorsement images weren't the end of it. My grandfather's gifts had been administered through an accounting firm the whole time, and once he authorized the release, they handed over their correspondence file along with the payment records. Folded in among those records were notes the family had sent over the years, requests, updates, thank yous, and several of them were written as me, in that same forging hand. One of them, dated 2 years back, asked my grandfather, in my voice, whether he might increase the monthly help from $5,000 to $7,000, because, the letter said, Grace wants to go back for her nurse practitioner certification, and the tuition is steep. I had never written those words. I had never asked that man for $1. Someone had used my name and my grandfather's love for me to negotiate a raise on a theft. That was the moment the whole thing changed shape in my hands. The stolen money was a wound. The forged letters were a plan. You can argue that taking money was a misunderstanding between family. You cannot argue your way out of signing someone else's name to ask for more of it. That signature, repeated, escalating, was the difference between a family fight and a felony. And it was all on paper now, with my grandfather's authorization on top of it. That night I sat with a choice. I could take all of this to a lawyer quietly, file the claims, let it move through offices and never say a word at the party. It would have been cleaner. It would have been safer. Part of me, the part that had spent 31 years avoiding scenes, wanted that badly. But I'd watched my mother work for too long to believe quiet would ever be safe. If I did this behind closed doors, she would be the one to tell the family what happened. She'd say I'd turned greedy, that I'd attacked a grieving widow over a misunderstanding, that I'd torn the family apart for money. She would rewrite me the same way she'd rewritten those checks. The only way to keep my own story was to tell it myself, out loud, in front of every witness who'd otherwise hear her version first. So I called Dana and made it real. The restitution demand and the criminal report would be filed through proper channels, on their own timeline. But the reveal, the moment the family learned the truth, would happen at that table, in front of those people, because that was the one room my mother couldn't edit. I'm not doing this to hurt them, I told Dana, and I meant it. I'm doing it so they can't keep doing it to me. She was quiet, then said, "Bring only what you need. A wall of paper looks like a vendetta. 3 checks look like the truth." I wrote that down. 48 hours to the party. I had a folder, a calm I'd earned the hard way, and one grandfather who'd promised me he wouldn't look away from the truth, even when it wore his daughter's face. In the 2 days before the party, my family did what they always did, which was make it easier for me to do what I'd decided. Sloan posted a story showing off an extravagant surprise gift she'd bought our grandfather, a watch that cost more than I made in a month. Paid for, I now understood, with his own redirected money. She captioned it about how family is everything. I looked at it for a while and felt the last of my hesitation burn off clean. Then my mother called, with her final instruction. "Wear something nice, Grace," she said. "Not your work clothes. This is your grandfather's night. Don't make it sad. Don't make it about you." I almost laughed. For 4 years they'd made my whole life about them. About Sloan's lifestyle and my mother's house, built on money meant to keep me from drowning, and now I was being warned not to make a single night about myself. "I'll dress up," I said. "I promise I'll look nice." It was the truest thing I'd said to her in months, and she had no idea. She wanted me presentable. She wanted me to blend into the wallpaper of her perfect evening and pass the flowers and stay small. I hung up and laid out the one good dress I owned, the navy one I wore to funerals and interviews, the dress you put on when you need people to take you seriously. She'd asked me to be presentable. I intended to be unforgettable. Then I sat down and went over it all one more time, the checks, the letters, the order I'd lay them down, the way I'd say it. Calm. Short sentences. Let the paper do the shouting. The afternoon of the party I came early to set up the flowers, and I found my mother alone at her kitchen table, and for one moment I almost lost my nerve. She didn't hear me come in. She was sitting with a stack of bills spread in front of her, foreclosure language visible at the top of one, her reading glasses pushed up into hair that had gone grayer than I'd let myself notice. She looked old. She looked tired in a way that went past one bad night. She looked like a woman who was losing, and for a breath I saw her not as the architect of 4 stolen years, but as my mother, drowning in her own way, and the part of me that had spent my whole life forgiving her surged up hard. She glanced up and saw me and didn't bother to hide the bills. "You don't know what it's like," she said quietly, almost to herself. "To stand to lose the house your husband built with his own hands. I wasn't going to let it go. I couldn't." For 1 second I almost folded. I almost said it could wait, that we'd find another way, that I understood. Then I remembered counting quarters in my car for gas while she kept her house with my money. I remembered 4 birthdays where she'd warned me not to make it about myself. I remembered a thank you note I never wrote, asking for more. Her desperation was real. It still wasn't a defense. "I know what it's like to lose things, Mom," I said evenly. "I've been losing them quietly for 4 years." And I went to arrange the flowers, my hands steady, my heart a closed fist, the way it has to be when the work matters more than the feeling. An hour before guests arrived, my grandfather